Hello, everyone, and welcome to Claris Community Live. This is our 19th episode, and today it's my pleasure to welcome Todd Weller from CrossIT, and he is going to introduce the Execute Data API script step. And when we asked last fall about what new-ish FileMaker features you most wanted to hear about, this was by far the winner. So I'm thrilled to have Todd here, giving us actually what will be a sneak peek of his Claris Engage session. As we get started, if you could click on the little 3 squares apps button down in the corner and just let us know what your experience is with the Execute Data API script step and with JSON. That will help Todd, give him a little more orientation to how deep he needs to go on covering some concepts. And with that, Todd, do you want to give you a brief introduction?
Okay, well, thank you, Rosemary. Glad to be here and talk to you all. Yeah, so why are we here? We're talking about the Execute FileMaker Data API. It's another tool in the toolbox. I would say you don't want to use it just because it's there, because I know sometimes we have a habit, we would just latch onto a feature and use it, but there are certainly applications where it's going to serve you the best because of what it's able to do. Myself, I find it easier to implement because it is a single script step to return a very nicely formatted JSON object. Granted, you can create your own, but it's not something where, it's very repeatable because the format's always going to be the same, so you don't have to worry about that. The request that you send to the Execute FileMaker Data API script step is a JSON object, which is easy to construct, as we'll take a look at. And then, of course, then the result is consistent, so it's very easy to parse out. So that's what we're going to be looking at today, is why you may want to change the way you do certain things to make use of this script step in your programming. So,
All right. So, with some poll votes in, we're almost exactly half and half on people who do and do not use the script step in their development right now. And I'm showing the JSON familiarity. And it looks like about 65%. So 2/3 answered that they're using JSON all the time or frequently. And then 16% sometimes, and 15% rarely to never. And a
okay.
couple people have replied, "What is JSON?" So,
Okay.
so I think we have a pretty experienced audience, at least on the JSON side, which
Okay.
is good. And for those of you who aren't as familiar with JSON, I'm going to drop a link for the episode we did back in the fall, just a JSON primer community live episode we did with Mark LaRochelle from Productive Computing. And yeah, so with that, let's get started. So first, oh, and just a reminder to everybody, just drop your questions into chat, and we really want this to be a conversation. So please, as you have questions about what Todd's saying, drop him in chat and I will interrupt him. So to get started, Todd, what is this script step that lets us use the data
Okay.
API?
Yeah. So what the script step is it is building off of the Claris FileMaker Data API, which was introduced way back in FileMaker 17. It follows the representational state transfer architecture. So if you hear someone talk about a RESTful API, that is what this is. And it was designed for accessing, the hosted FileMaker databases through web services. Well, you turn around with FileMaker 19, and what they've done is they've introduced this script step which uses this same underlying functionality to return API results on a local file that were, you just without having to have the file hosted. Now, at the time back with FileMaker 19, the only supported actions that we have were read and metadata. But then with the release of Claris FileMaker 2024 or version 21, if you will, these supported actions now include being able to create, update, and to duplicate. And so the script step has gotten more powerful because we're able to do these additional things. We can use it on a local file without having to have the file hosted. Now, obviously, if the file is hosted, you can still use it, but it's not calling on those the web service. It's still running essentially internally in the file itself. And so that's what it is. And like I said, the request is in JSON, and then the response is in JSON, which
All
then
right.
we can then parse through and get everything out of.
Cool. And I have a quick question. If you're out there in the audience, can someone just throw something in chat to everybody to say hello? Because we are not sure that I may have misconfigured the webinar permissions. All right. Guess not. We've got lots of hellos. So chat is working. So
Okay.
again, great to see you all. I love seeing all the familiar names and unfamiliar names roll by. So thank you very much. And please ask questions as you have them. All right. So what are
Yeah,
some examples of what I can do with the Execute Data API script step? Really, like, what does it make easier when I'm building a FileMaker app?
Okay. Well, one of the things, in fact, I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen so that we can look at these examples. And that the first one is there's a technique that I've used to duplicate records where I collect information using some custom scripting with grabbing information that I want to duplicate because it's a scripted duplication and not just a duplicate record, because there are things that should not be duplicated. So this here is an order. Maybe the customer calls in and they want to go ahead and repeat this particular order. So I can run the script step, and you can see now we have a brand new order, but all of the new information that should be cleared out wasn't brought over because it was not part of that JSON object that was returned from the request. Now we're going to look at how all of this works a little bit later on, but just wanted to give you a feel. So if we go ahead and fill in the information, now we're ready to go ahead and proceed, and things are moving on. Now, one of the other things that we can do, and like I said, this is where we got more power with this latest release of the Claris FileMaker platform, is I'm going to go ahead and pop open another window here. And what I've done is I've created a script log because when you're running a server-side script, you can go into the logon server and see, okay, where did an error occurred? But there really isn't a nice way to do that without jumping through a lot of hoops on the FileMaker Pro side. So what the script step allows you to do is, without having to leave the context of the script that you're running and pop open a window, write a record to a log, or try to keep track of it in a variable or a global field, you're able to use the Execute FileMaker Data API script step to go ahead and write records over the log. So I'm going to go ahead and run the same process that I used to duplicate this particular order. Is that I'm going to go ahead and run that, and what you'll see is that as the script is running, we'll start to see where all of a sudden I've got script log records in a table occurrence that is in no way or shape or form linked to the actual order table occurrence grouping. So that's a nice way, and then of course you can be as verbose as you want, where you're capturing, times and a little bit of a message and the error number and like what the script step was and things like that. So it gives you ability to, if you're troubleshooting a script, you can add that in, fairly easily. Because like I said, I set it up as a subscript that I can just pop into my script and call. So those are a couple of examples of what is possible. So.
Yep, and I just want to thank Matt for dropping to the panelists. He's reading my mind, saying, what are some good, helpful resources to get started? And the first thing is FileMaker's help. So I'm going to drop that link in chat, and we will also share these links out to the community. If you go back to the community post that announces this in the community live topic, we'll share the links that we'll share throughout the session, and also link to the recording. Yeah, so I think.
Okay. Yeah, I guess if I could just add to that, Rosemary,
Yeah.
the two primary resources that I've used is because what we're doing is built off of the FileMaker Data API for web services. You want to refer to that how manual, as well as the specific Execute FileMaker Data API script step that you'll find in the FileMaker Pro help. So you want to check things in both places depending on what question you're trying to answer.
Yep. And we've already got a question that I think goes to like the next topic we were going to discuss, which is what are the differences between the script step?
The differences.
Using the script step in FileMaker Pro and the data API on FileMaker server.
All right, so there are a couple of different, the main similarity is this result that's returned in the JSON format. It's going to be the same format as if you requested it, via FileMaker server and the FileMaker Data API on the host. You're going to get the same JSON back. The differences is that FileMaker is going to be executing this. That's executing the script step does not need to be hosted, which is nice. If you've got a standalone file, you can still make use of this. If you're running on FileMaker Go, you can use this script step. It does not make a web service call to a host. And if you, like as I mentioned, you could have this file, on FileMaker server and still use it, but the FileMaker Data API does not need to be enabled for the script step to work. So that's one of the other differences. So you don't have to worry about that configuration. And also the request is simple JSON. If you've ever done anything with the FileMaker Data API as a web service, there is an endpoint URL. There are certain methods that you need to use, some header information that goes along with your parameter in the curl options. Well, for the script step, we only have to worry about that JSON request, or that JSON object for the request, it makes things a little bit easier. So.
All right. Yes, and the question specifically from John, and John, I think I understand what you're asking. Correct me in the chat if I get this wrong. So if I'm using the Execute Data API script in a perform script on server situation, are the new capabilities in FileMaker 2024 of add, update, and duplicate records also available in that context? So running as a FileMaker script within a FileMaker script on server versus running in FileMaker Pro on your local machine.
Yes. I do not have any firsthand experience, unfortunately, because a lot of mine has been on the local files. But I'm going to guess that the answer is correct. That you can use to create an update if you're doing perform script on server. The one thing that you're not able to do is if you're using the web service, you can have it perform a script. Well, this is a script step, so if you need to perform a script, you would just add another perform script step to that script. So that's I know that's the one difference as far as between the web service versus the script step is, calling a script does not work. So, so I hope that helps point John in the right direction. I apologize for not having a better answer, but again, most of my experience has been with the local files.
Yeah, it looks like actually John was asking the new add, update, or duplicate features. He's asking if those are available to the data API when running as a web service. And I think that's a good question. And I may have to take that back to the product team and find out for you, John.
Yeah.
And then a couple other questions. How does, and actually the lively discussion too about performance, how from a performance standpoint for getting to contextless data, does the Execute Data API script step compare with Execute SQL?
Execute SQL. I know some of the early responses that I've seen, because I've done a little bit of research. Like I said, the example that I showed with, collecting data, to use to duplicate script. I did some capturing of, like start time on the script and when it ended. And, it pains me to say the Execute FileMaker Data API actually runs a little bit slower. However, it took me one script step where the other method took me over 40 script steps to compile all the data and everything that I needed. Obviously, if you're getting information back as Execute SQL, you need to be able to get it into a format that you can use, where this is returning data as JSON. So you need to kind of balance, the performance versus how much time do I want to spend in my programming to set up, whatever method you're using. So that's, like I said, I don't have any hard figures, but I know there was a conversation, I believe Wim Decor and Taylor Sharp had a thread on the FileMaker community that were talking about some of the performance differences between the Execute FileMaker Data API. Now that was with the read operation, because it's an older post, and that was before we had like the create and the update options for the script step, but probably still applicable.
Yeah, and I think just one other observation to share before we move on is Russell says, in my experience, perform script on server is 3 times faster than Execute Data API. So he's saying it's tried to use it on several instances, but every time I've tested, it's always slower. I think that is something hard to troubleshoot, Russell. It might be good to ask that question in the community with kind of a little bit more information about your environment and your app to see if the bigger brains there and the collective wisdom of the community can answer that question. All right. So any other similarities and differences? Todd?
Similarities and differences. I guess those are the main ones. I guess one thing I will point out is that with the web service, you're usually referencing a layout, and that's usually found in the endpoint URL, where you have like the file name and then the layout name that you're using. What we'll find is when you're building your JSON object for the Execute FileMaker Data API script step, that layout is going to be referenced as part of the JSON object, or sometimes it'll be a table name if you're using like a metadata action. But you'll find that there in the request, because obviously there is no endpoint URL here. So.
All right. I just like going back to that general performance question. I think Sean shared a great little story that he had a client issue. They were using Execute SQL, and something that should have been small and quick but was causing lags in performance. They swapped out with Execute FileMaker Data API, and the client performance issues went away.
All right. Well, thank you for that confirmation.
That's kind of exciting to hear. Ken asked, before we move on, is your demo file available?
It will be, because this is part of my Engage presentation that I'll be doing here at the end of March. We're going to wait until, because I was actually working on this demo file this morning, so I'll probably be continuing to work on it up until I give my presentation at Engage. So we'll make it available to the community once we're past the Engage presentation, but I'm very happy to share it at that point. So.
All right. So next up, I think I'm going to talk about how does the script step work in general?
In general, okay. So there are 3 parameters that you want to set up. Is you have a request, which is, that JSON object that you're sending to the Execute FileMaker Data API script step to get back your result. The target is going to be where you're going to put the result of the action. And then the last one is just the checkbox that you see on a number of different FileMaker script steps where you can select the entire contents or not. So now, my personal preference is that I use variables when I'm setting up both the request and the target, just because I feel that it makes the troubleshooting a little bit easier. But in the script step itself, both the request and target give you access to the calculation engine, so you can go in there and write your calculation directly there. Like I said, my personal preference is just to do it in variables, and then I reference the variables in the script step. So that is the general information about the setup of the script step. Here's just some more information about that the layouts, where you're going to reference either a layout and that underlying table occurrence group. And so it allows for contextless context is what I've dubbed it, where the layout or table that you're referencing in your request, it does not have to be in the current context of your script, but whatever you're doing in your request is still going to be tied to that table occurrence and underlying tables and the relationships that you've established in your relationship graph. So just be, aware of that. And again, another personal preference for me is I'd like to maintain API specific layouts because it's easier to prevent accidental changes which could impact your results. And I usually use some type of like API underscore. I try to avoid like spaces and any special characters because you could use these same layouts for a web service call, and certain characters, they don't like it in the URL, so you have to worry about the URL encoding. So I try to pick friendly names when I'm naming those layouts. So, and that brings us, are we ready to dive into the request keys, or do we want to, are there more?
I think not seeing the questions I'm seeing right now aren't really, they're more about like server to server actual data API interactions,
Okay.
which are outside the scope of what we're talking about today. But I just want to share, I will take those questions back to the product team and either respond to you personally or in the community with answers to those questions.
Okay. All right. So highlighted, some I've listed all of the request keys that you can include in your JSON request. I'm just going to point out what I consider not necessarily the important ones, but the ones you're going to use most often. The first one is the action, which we now have 6 potential actions where you've got the read and metadata from before. Now we have create, update, delete, and duplicate. As my note to myself there in parentheses indicates that it's going to default to read. If you don't declare an action in your JSON, it's going to interpret it as a read request. Again, personal preference, I would argue that that's, even though it is somewhat optional, if you're doing a read, is I would still go ahead and explicitly declare it, just so that future self, when they go back in to look at it, you can see, oh, I'm definitely doing a read here versus some other action. So I would just lobby for that. There is a version that you're able to declare. Those are the 3 options: V1, V2, or V latest. And where this comes into play is it dictates how portal data is returned. If you have a portal on your layout in V1, what's going to happen is it will return the results based on whether it is in form view or table view, which could change whether you see all related records or just one. In V2, it is always going to use the form view, which will give you all the related records in your portal. And then V latest is obviously it's going to pick the latest version, which right now is going to be V2. But it does default to V1. So if you're dealing with data in a portal in a read request, that's something you're going to want to take a look at. So then, like I said, the layouts and tables, you're going to use one or the other typically in your request. What I want to point out about this is you'll notice that the key name is layouts plural, but you are specifying a singular layout or table occurrence name. So just to be aware of that.
Before you go on, there's a question specifically about layouts. And do the fields you're looking for to get data out of with Execute Data API need to be on the layout?
Yes. And what's interesting is for a read request, you're going to get whatever layouts are on. Let me try again. Whatever fields are on the layout, that's what you're going to get back. But if you're doing a create or an update, those fields do not need to be there. So you could read certain information out, but if you need to write and create a whole new record with all information, you don't need to maintain separate layouts for those other actions. It's just what's getting read back is going to be dependent upon the fields that are on the layout. I did a little bit of testing, both with like the create and update action as well as sorting, is that because as part of your query, you can specify a sort order that you want the information to come back in, is that the field for the sort does not need to be on the layout. It's just the data that's returned are the fields that need to be on your layout. So, yeah, so for a read request, these are ones that would apply there. That again, they're optional, as you can see, because the query is going to default to all records. If you want specific information, it's going to be an array of JSON objects that specify the find criteria. We're going to look at some examples here when you're a little older. The sort is that same thing where you specify fields and whether it's ascending or descending in an object. And then the offset and the limit is, the first record that's going to be returned defaults to 1, and then the maximum number of records that are going to be returned, which is 100. And then obviously if you've got dealing with a large number of records, you would just make repeated calls and adjust your offset accordingly to get the next set of 100 records or 200 records, depending on whatever you've set your limit for.
All right.
Dealing with the portal data, you can specify whether you want data from a specific portal or all portals. And then the same thing with the portal itself. You can select an offset and a limit for that information as well. Just to point out that the maximum number of related records that are returned defaults to 50 for portal data. So just be aware of that slight difference in behavior. Then as we get into the request keys for creating and updating, we've got the record ID, which is the unique ID number of a record. This is not necessarily the primary key that you're using, a UUID or auto enter serial number. This is like the get record number function in FileMaker. This is the number that function returns. So it's the record ID that FileMaker has assigned to it. And then the field data and the portal data are both objects that specify the information that is being written or returned, from the action. There's a few optional requests here where you have the mod ID. You can also specify under the options object whether you're going to allow and follow the user setting for validation, or if you're going to use like the script setting where you can override that. In both cases, it defaults to user, as you can see there. But if you want to, prohibit or disable where you have prohibit modification of a value during data entry, if that's enabled, but you set it to script, then it will follow that behavior and ignore that validation error there. And then there's a few script extraneous keys that don't apply to us because we're using the script step. This is ones you'll find if you're using the FileMaker Data API manual. These will be listed because they do apply to the web service. Obviously, the database is always going to be the database that belongs to the window that's running the script. The authorization is going to be either the privileges of the current user or full access, again, based on the script. The content type is always going to be JSON, and we talked about this before, but to perform another script, he would use perform script instead of that key that would be included in like a web service action.
All right, there's a couple more questions.
Sure.
Just about general getting data. So the first one is, when you're doing a read operation, do you read back the raw data, underlying data in a number field, or do you get back the data as it's formatted on the layout with, 1,000 separators and decimal points and all of that?
As far as I can recall, it's always you get the raw number.
Okay.
I have to admit that's something that I haven't tested, but I believe it's always the raw. But I have to admit, because I have those separate layouts that I use, I'm typically not employing specific formatting to my field objects that are on that layout. So I will make a note for myself and test that before to have a better answer for next time.
And then there's Dan Shockley has a question that I have no idea. He's asking about the zeroth layout, and if the Execute Data API can get to that zeroth layout, where you specify a layout name is a base table name, which will give you all fields on that non-existent kind of background, underline, and FileMaker layout.
I have not seen that. I mean, I know I do have a couple of metadata examples that we can get to, but I do not recall seeing any like layouts listed that were not one of the layouts that I had created. So.
Great. So now, let's talk about API responses.
Okay. Yeah, so this is just a very simple example of a successful response. I believe this was for record creation, where you see there is a message object that's included there that tells me, has both a code number as well as a message. And then in the response object, it's telling me the modification ID, or modification number rather, and then the record ID of the record that was just created. This was for, I believe, a create. Obviously, if you're doing a read, the response object is going to be much broader, because it's going to have all the different fields and the number of records and things like that that you've asked for. So that's a very simple, successful message. The error message, there's probably not going to be a response. The big thing would be under the messages section, where again you have the code as well as the message. Now, what is very nice about the API response, that if there is an error, where possible, the Execute FileMaker Data API returns the FileMaker error code that we're used to seeing, when we're going through and doing script debugging. Like in this particular one here, is I created a read request that I knew was not going to return any records. And so it gave me the 401 that we're used to seeing, all of the time. Just a couple things to point out about the error response is that, I don't know if you noticed, but it's actually an array of objects. It's not just a single object there. I will admit I have never seen more than one message, but the possibility does exist. And because it is an array, you need to make sure that you're getting that information out correctly. So I've got a couple examples here on the screen, where if you're getting the element for the message is 0.code is going to give you the number, and then the get element to get the message portion of that response. If you're going to be doing this a lot, it's probably worth considering using a custom function for each value that you can just drop in and get out very quickly. Now, what is nice again about, and this I guess is another difference in behavior, if you are communicating with a web service and you use insert from URL, the script step probably succeeded, but then the error is somewhere in that response. But with the Execute FileMaker Data API script step, get last error is going to give us the same value that's returned in the code key part of the response. And then last error detail is going to give us the same result as the message. And then if you want to find out exactly where the error occurred, you can get the get last error location function. So it makes your troubleshooting and error trapping a lot easier because that script step is going to behave the same as all the others and give you meaningful responses, which we have. We'll take a look at some examples of those as we get into that. So I think that's all I have on just the general information about the request and the responses. I don't know if we want to pause for questions or if I should just get into the examples.
Why don't you jump into the examples because there are no new questions.
Okay. So it's just a little bit bigger so we can see things. So like I said, these first four are metadata, which depending on what you're doing are going to be helpful where you can, get all of your tables. So we can see here, this is what the calculation would look like for the request. And then the request itself you see here in the bottom. And then if I click over here, I can see the response and it's giving me my OK message. And then it just lists the base table and then the name of the table occurrence for each of the TOs that are in my solution. Now, if I want to get specific information about a table, that's where I would use the tables function and say, okay, I want to give me the contact table. And as I jump over here to my result, now I'm seeing information about, the field metadata. And then here's all the information about a single field where this is the contact ID and it's giving me, that information. And if I scroll through here, again, it's just, repeated. The layouts and the layout metadata work very similar. I guess going back to Dan's question, like this one here, I'm still specifying layouts, but I'm leaving it blank so that way it knows to give me information about all layouts. And when I run that, you can see here, what is nice is it also preserves the folder names, which I thought was kind of a cool thing that it did. So you could see how you have your layouts grouped in that. And I'm not seeing any layout that I didn't create myself. So there may be a way to get it, Dan, but I'm not. You might have to ask the other Todd about that one. So, all right. So moving on, the read records. Now, part of this is just the way that I like to build my JSON. I just like to stage things and put the pieces together rather than trying to write it all as one chunk. So here we're building our request. We're just looking for the description anywhere where jet is contained. And then because the query itself is an array, we need to put that in an array here and build the final JSON object. So we get this where we're doing a read from this layout. Here's our query, our version, and then we get a response back that looks like this, where we see that it's okay. And then we get in, and then this is the field data that is on that particular layout, where we get the description, the part number, the price, and then the product ID. And then now what is nice here about the read is you get the information that you specifically asked for based on your query, but then it's also giving you some general information that you can see down here about the total number of records, as well as the found count. And so again, that's going back to where you have your index and offset. If it's returned a bigger number, then okay, I need to make another call or another execution of the script step, and adjust my offset accordingly to get the next set of records. For a create record, again, building the object that contains the data that I want to send to it. And then go ahead and build the JSON so we have something that looks like this, where I've referred to my product layout, These are the 4 fields that I'm going to populate. My action is create. And then when I switch over here to look at my result, again, you can see that everything was okay. The mod ID is 0, which we would expect because we just created the record. And then the record ID is number 128. Now, if I want to update that record, it's going to ask me for that number. So I'm just going to type that in. This is something I added for the demo, not necessarily something that you would have to do in your own use of the script step, where we've updated the description, we've added the cost, changed the price, and then we just include the record ID so that it knows, what record is getting created, or getting updated rather. And then here we get 0, okay, and our mod ID has changed to 1. So we know that that modification was successful. I can duplicate that record. Oops. Again, and here's where I'm setting those options because I don't want to have any of the validation I have set, mess me up because I'm running it as a script, not as a user. And I know this is what I want to do. And so that's what the request is going to look like. And again, we get the same response where we've created a new record with its new ID. And then if I want to delete a record, we just have to refer to the ID that we want to delete. And now we're here, and there is no response because the record is gone, but we do get our 0 code as well as our OK message. So those are some very quick examples of the different actions that we have available to us. So we want to pause for questions, or should I dive into? I have some examples that fail on purpose so we can see what the responses are.
Well, I don't see any questions, but I do see one that we missed, and I think this is kind of outside the scope of the session today, but I think it's a really good question and would love community input on it in chat. Thomas asked, for resources generally, like not FileMaker specific, on getting started interacting with APIs. And so I don't know if any of you who are more expert have any favorite resources you share with new developers who are just learning. I will say there is a good lesson in the FileMaker Pro Expert certification course that is a very high level introduction to the Execute Data API scripts, not to the insert from URL script step for interacting with a couple of simple APIs. But I have not done a lot of this, so I'm just going to leave that question open to the community. And actually, there's another question from someone who is late about the demo file. And Todd will be sharing this demo file after Claris Engage. Because he's previewing his Engage session, he's going to hold it until then. Oh, and Thomas is saying he's specifically looking for information on getting started with integrating FileMaker with APIs. Yeah, so for that, I start with Mark's lesson in the FileMaker Expert certification course. Oh, question about these data API examples. Does any session information come across when you're making these queries, such as the account name?
I have not seen that come across. Like I said, the most verbose responses that you get are when you're using like the metadata response or requests, or if you're reading records, and pretty much what I showed here as far as the response is what comes back, where you have a lot of information about the data. Now there is no portal, but you would see that information here. And then we get into the data info, but there's nothing necessarily specific about the user or anything like that that I have seen in all the different ways that I've tested it and used it.
Okay. And another question about reading portal data. If you have portal parameters set such as a sort order or filters enabled, are those honored by the data API, or do you get the sorted and filtered portal records, or do you just get all the records as they are in the data model?
Yeah, that is an excellent question. And that is another one that I am not certain of the answer just because since I'm using a custom layout, I don't spend time setting up, filters or sorting on those portals that I have on those the specific layouts for the API. Because usually what I'm getting back, I just want the data. I'm not really concerned about the order that I get the data in, so I haven't paid attention. So I have made a mental note for myself to find the answer to that question as well. So,
All right. Oh, someone else answered that yes, portal data are returned sorted.
oh, okay. Thank you.
All right, and a couple other people are saying, generally session info is known to the script. Um, so yeah, it's the session account privileges that are under the account running the script. All right, yeah, so let's see some failure examples.
Okay. So obviously you could have an unknown action. This one here, because we're so used to doing a find rather than a read, I picked that one. And then we get a response back of a 1708 error, which is a newer, and I think it's specific to the data API. If that code is unfamiliar, that's why it's unfamiliar. Now, what you'll notice is that here on the bottom, um, it just has, parameter value is invalid. And that's just because of a custom function that I use to help convert an error code into its text string. But you will notice here that the actual message that comes back and is also what would be returned if you use the get last error detail. It actually tells you that it was an unknown action and specifies what the action was, which I thought was, very helpful that it would do that. Another thing that may happen is if you have a undefined layout. In this case, I left that key completely out of my request, and I got, the layout name is required. And you can see here again, it's the same error code with a different message, but the default, help listing of, the error codes isn't quite as descriptive. So that's where, looking at the get last error detail is helpful. You could also have a missing layout where this one here, I just made the layout name plural. And so it was smart enough and it gave me, the expected layout is missing error code, that we're used to in FileMaker.
And Dan just tested for the zeroth layout and got the same error.
Okay.
So thanks, Dan, for doing that test and reporting back so quickly.
Yes. Missing field is the same way. We've already looked at, the no found records. You can have an invalid sort order because it's actually the parameter would be like the field name and the field name, and then the sort order is either ascend or descend. I couldn't think of a better one, so I just said go up, just to see what it would do. And what you'll see there is that, and this one here was kind of a unique, I mean, it makes sense, but it wasn't necessarily the error that I was expecting, where it just says the value list is missing. So just be aware of that one. We have one here where the field does not exist, which again, just field missing. If there's an invalid record ID, you're going to get, the record is missing response that you would expect to find if you were doing it in FileMaker. And then the last one was kind of interesting. This is a duplicate action on the items table where I am using a auto enter UUID as my primary key instead of a serial number. And regardless of what I did with my options, I got this error, which was user canceled action. So if you are trying to do a duplicate in a table that has UUIDs rather than just a standard serial number, just be aware to look for this as a potential error that you might have come up.
All right, and we are rapidly running out of time. So just a couple things. I just dropped into chat a whole bunch of links, and it looks like I messed up one of them. I apologize for that. Hopefully you can sort it out. Of some useful blogs that were published both in the FileMaker 19 timeframe by partners when we first introduced the Execute Data API script step, and a few more recently about how adding the right information or the right operations help make that better. So please watch that. And I did open up the closing questions for our poll. We just want to know a little bit more about if this content was helpful to you, and what improvements you're likely to make as a result of having attended. And so Todd, in the last couple of minutes, first, there is a question. When you are building the API request, calculated JSON, are you doing that in a global calculated field, or like how are you?
Usually, I calculate it in just local variables, like a single $ variables. Now I am putting it into a global field here just for the sake of being able to share it with all of you. But typically, I would just do that in a local variable.
All right, thank you. And I don't know if you want to take 2 minutes to circle back to one of the examples you showed at the beginning and like dive a little deeper and show how you did it.
Sure.
Maybe that duplicate example feels helpful.
The duplicate example. Okay. Yes. So I'm going to go under the hood here so you can see what layout that I'm using. So for that order duplication, I have an order here. Now this is another thing that I always do if I have a layout that is specific to a specific task. I make sure that future me remembers why it's there, put some notes on it and all of that. So you can see here where I'm grabbing the billing address and information, the shipping, and then here I have a portal that's just going in and grabbing 2 pieces of information about the product. And so let me go back over here, back into browse. And I know we talked about not doing this, but I'm going to go ahead and drop into the script workspace as well as script debugger. And so this here is where I'm starting to, gather the information here. This is where I've, set up my request. And then I'm going out, getting the data, just doing a little bit of error trapping here. And then from that point, then I just jump over to the new record. And what's really helpful is because of how the information is returned, because you're getting the field name and then the field value, is it's very easy to then parse out the key as the field name, get the value, then you grab your layout table name of your target layout where you're working, which in this case I've switched over to an order table. And then instead of having to specify each field by name, I'm able to just use the set field by name and loop through all of the records that came back for the shipping address, the mail or the billing address. And then I come down here and do the same thing where in this case, because I only have one portal, I just again, you pull the data out for the portal into a local variable, switch over to a record, or the layout for the items, and then do the same kind of process where I'm getting the key or the total number of values, and then drop into another loop to look at each of the records, create a new request, and then another nested loop to use that indirection technique with set field by name to loop through the portal data that's returned. And then that brings me back out, and then I have my duplicated record where I have not filled in any values that I don't want to have carried over, but I have captured the stuff that should be carried over. So that's a very quick peek under the hood, so I hope that was helpful.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Todd. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I just want to share on our Q&A at the end that we've started. 60% of our attendees are somewhat confident to start playing with the script step, and 34% are very confident. And about 10% say they're not at all confident to get started. And I want to just share, I shared all back so that all of you can also see what people are inspired to do. People are inspired to learn more about this and start testing it. Script logging and investigating, simplifying some data write scripts. And currently using it. Couple smiley faces. Transportable code, better error trapping, and making their table occurrence groups and relationships graph less complicated. So
sounds good.
Sounds good. So thank you again, Todd. Thank you everyone for joining us.
Very welcome. And thank you for your time.
And just a schedule update. So we are doing another community live next week. Alexis Allen will be joining me, and we're going to have a discussion about design, some general design principles, and how you can start to apply those principles to make your FileMaker apps more usable. And then we're going to take March off as we prepare for and then attend and put on Claris Engage. But we'll be back in April, and we're tentatively planning for April and May some Claris Engage follow-up sessions. So if you can't join us at Engage, we'll try to bring some of the good stuff from Engage back to Community Live in the weeks after Claris Engage. So thanks again, everyone.